Well, good morning everyone. Yes, I'm down at Whitby today with Bob and Wendy, just down by the harbour. You can probably hear the gulls in the background. And over away on the hill, over here, if I can just get the right angle for you, because I just need to work out where everything is in the reverse image. You can just see the ruins of Whitby Abbey over here. Which is in this area here, and to the right of that, or I don't know if it's the right because this may be a reversed image, you can see Whitby Parish Church, and I hope to go up there because it's quite a striking relic really of the early English Protestant Reformation, and when we go up there you'll see why. I'm standing down by the harbour. Bob has just gone to take some stuff back to the car. Wendy is sitting over there behind me, as you can see. That's you. Because she doesn't want to be seen with this mad person talking to himself in the into the camera. So I'm down at Whitby Harbour. Whitby is famous for a couple of reasons. One to do with the Abbey, and the other one to do with literature, in that Bram Stoker's Dracula famously was shipwrecked on his way to England off the coast of Whitby, and the coffin with Dracula inside was washed up at Whitby. And this is also, I believe, where the mental hospital was, where Renfrew was a patient who became the kind of main supporting character on Dracula's rampage until he eventually was killed himself. But the other reason is a historic reason, that Whitby Abbey, so the ruin you see behind me is actually the medieval Abbey of Whitby, but in the early Saxon period, Whitby was famous for having a double monastery of men and women living under a Celtic rule of life under the leadership of St Hilda. And that's a very important point, because Whitby Abbey is an indicator of the differing understanding of the role of women in the church through the centuries. The Celtic church had absolutely no difficulty whatsoever with the leadership of women within the church, but the Synod of Whitby is most famous for adopting the Roman calendar, the Roman tonsure, the Roman way of life, and that inevitably led to the decline of women's leadership, the Roman Church being very much of the opinion that only priests can have leadership roles, and as only men can be priests, then therefore only men can have leadership roles. And this is an attitude that we still labour with today in the modern church. There are signs of change, but it's very difficult to break habits of a 1,000 years. St Hilda was very significant because of the role of a number of her monks, people like St Wilfrid, St Willibrord, who went over to the near continent in the Netherlands and what is now the Netherlands and Belgium, and converted the pagans there to Christianity. But they still followed a great deal of her advice and her instruction when called upon. So I'm just going to walk over, and I'm just going to get Bob and Wendy to say hello to you all, because you've not seen Bob and Wendy on my... There we are.
Good
say
morning.
hello.
From Whitby.
Yeah.
Try speaking to the microphone so they
Good
can hear
morning
you.
from sunny Whitby.
It is actually a lovely sunny day, isn't it? It's a bit chilly, but it's a nice bright sunny day. So we'll stop there and we'll talk more later. So we're now at the top of the hill, and St Mary's Parish Church is just behind me, and Whitby Abbey is over at the back. There's a Celtic cross been set up here, and if I get a little bit closer you might be able to see some of the detail. In the very top of the cross is a lamb holding a cross, and that represents the resurrected Christ, and surrounding him is a man, a lion, a bull and an eagle, which are the symbols of the four evangelists. Below that is a carving of Christ, one of King David, one of St Hilda, the founder of Whitby Abbey, and at the bottom is St Kedmon, who is the father of English church music, who died at the end of the 7th century. What we have here is an example. This church was originally built in the 12th century, and you can see above the chancel a Romanesque arch, which was very much the style of architecture of the mid to late Norman period. Romanesque arches are identifiable because of the semicircular nature of the arch rather than the more pointed Gothic arches which come later in the medieval period. For the practiced eye, there are a few things to notice. The first thing is that the chancel was originally where the altar in a Catholic church would be. After the Reformation, particularly the first part of the English Reformation, when Edward VI was king, the altars were stripped away as being idolatrous, and a communion table was laid out, which would have probably been in the vicinity of this pew here. The Word of God in Scripture became the most important part of the church service. And so rather than the altar taking centre stage, we have this magnificent 17th century, actually possibly 16th century, sorry, this one is 18th century pulpit. And you can actually hear, see these ear trumpets here, which would have been handed out to those who were hard of hearing. If you look around the box pews, you'll notice that there are pegs on the top of the pews, and this was because the pews would have been rented out to different families of the parish, and they would only have been uncovered if the family attended the church service. And so it became a way of identifying recusant Catholics and nonconformists, because their pews were not uncovered rather. In front of me, the baldacchino supporting the upstairs seating arrangements are the barley sugar cane style, which for those of you who are familiar also supports the baldacchino in St Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, which is just a curious coincidence really. And on the far side and the near side, these pews were slightly more important because they were closer to the chancel, closer to the pulpit, and so they would have belonged to the more important families of the parish, and then these smaller pews would have been available for the various different families. And as you can see, there are names on the doors. Another important thing to consider is that in the medieval period, these walls would not have been whitewashed. The whitewash is probably applied to remove all traces of the images of saints and the lives of the church fathers and the ancient Israelites. And in their place were put these blocks, painted blocks, which contain things like the Ten Commandments on these two posts, and the Paternoster, the Our Father, on this one. This was quite a significant change because the reason medieval churches were decorated so gaudily in comparison to our modern taste was because most of medieval England would have been pre-literate, not simply illiterate. It would have been a society where reading and writing simply were not part of the ordinary daily lives of everyday folk. And so there was a huge problem, really, initially, when the wall paintings were removed and the stained glass was removed and replaced with what is actually a very wordy approach to religion. Clearly, as the 18th and 19th centuries progressed and literacy rates improved significantly, this was much less of a problem. But it's just interesting to note that in places like Lancashire, which are renowned for having remained mostly Catholic throughout the Reformation period in England, this was probably largely because the people were illiterate and so were unable to participate in a religion of the word, such as Reformed Protestantism became. I'm going to just walk around the place now and just admire the view, and I'll just let you enjoy looking at the various bits and pieces of architecture and church decoration. And then, of course, on this side of the church, rather than having family pews, there were the free pews for the paupers and the less well-off members of this fishing community. I'm just going to walk out of the church now. And we're back outside the church now. I'm just going to walk around to the other side of the church, the seaward side, rather than the landward side. I can assure you the wind has suddenly picked up significantly as we walk around here. You can see it's quite an extensive graveyard. It's been in operation for literally hundreds of years. And these are shipping lanes, of course, so there are various vessels out at sea, as well as those that are currently in the harbour and the pilot ships that help to guide the boats through. On the far side of the harbour, in the far distance on the promontory opposite, there is actually a statue of Captain James Cook, who was a famous sailor who sailed from Whitby on a number of his voyages. And behind the statue on the left-hand side are two whale bones which have been set up as a triumphal arch. We may get a chance to go over there to have a look at those. And for those who might be considering visiting Whitby for a holiday in the future, the beach that you can see is on the opposite side of the harbour wall. This side is very much the industrial, in the sense of being the wharf and harbour for fishing boats. And the marina, the other side, is very much where people can go and sit and make sandcastles and paddle in the sea and that kind of thing. And as you can see, it's a rather beautiful stretch of beach as well. So I'm standing in what used to be the Laymaster's refectory in the monastery at Ampleforth. The tables and chairs in here are all made from oak and are what known as Thompson oak, the Mouseman chairs. And if you look carefully, carved onto most of the furniture, in some place or other, are little mice. And Robert Thompson was known as the Mouseman, and this was his emblem. And sometimes they're carved in sharp relief like that one, and sometimes they are carved into a hole. The Mouseman has continued his trade. His sons and grandsons now operate the business, based out in Kilburn, towards Thirsk, which is further along the road. Once we go into the monastery church, there'll be a lot more evidence of the Mouseman furniture. So we've come into the main building at the centre of the site at Ampleforth, and there is a large plaque in the middle of the pavement area, and roughly translated it says, "In this place stood the house given by the illustrious Lady Anne Fairfax of Gilling Castle to her chaplain, Dom Anselm Bolton, and he to his brethren who were left after leaving Gilloward, exiled 10 years before, to allow them to reconvene community life in the year of our salvation, 1802. Lady Anne Fairfax was a Catholic landowner who owned all the land around the monastery, between her castle at Gilling East and the hillside to the north of the abbey. And she had a chaplain visit her in her home as a Catholic, because there were no Catholic churches then. In the 18th century, it was still forbidden for Catholic priests to openly practice their faith, although a blind eye was turned to it largely by this time. She realised that when she died, her home would be transferred to her cousins, because she had no survivors, and they were Protestants. And she wanted to ensure, first of all, that her chaplain had somewhere to live after her death, but also that the local people who were Catholic would still have a priest to minister to them. And so she donated a house on the far side of the valley from where the castle was, so that it was out of the way of the new owners when they arrived. And she set him up in the lodge there, and he remained there after she died. In 1792, the French revolutionaries expelled English monks and nuns who had been living in France since the dissolution of the monasteries in England during the Reformation 200 or so years earlier. So Lady Anne Fairfax, who was the last of her line, was directly descended from Sir Thomas Fairfax, who had been the second in command of the parliamentary armies during the Civil War in the previous century, and had refused to take part in the trial and execution of Charles I, and so was rewarded by Charles II when the Restoration came with keeping his lands and not being punished as other parliamentarians were. He was in fact the commander of the parliamentary forces at the Battle of Naseby, probably the most important battle of the English Civil War. This Sir Thomas Fairfax was a distant cousin of a previous Sir Thomas Fairfax who had occupied a similar role, fighting for the Lancastrians during the Wars of the Roses, and was also rewarded for his loyalty by the eventual winners, Henry VII, Henry VIII. Now that Sir Thomas Fairfax, who was the distant cousin of the ancestor of Our Lady Anne, is also the common ancestor of Her Royal Highness the Princess William of Wales, better known as Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, and Ellen DeGeneres, of all people. So there's a nice interesting sociological link between my monastery, Ellen, and the royal family as it is today. So this is the monk's refectory, and around the walls are the portraits of the last priors of Ampleforth, well, the first prior and the last prior of Ampleforth, and then the abbots in order, chronological order of their abbatial reigns, including the current abbot, Abbot Cuthbert Madden. But this portrait here is the portrait of Abbot Patrick Barry, and beneath that book is the portrait of my legs. So please enjoy. You'll also see that Basil Hume, who was abbot here from the 1960s through to the 1970s, and Abbot Ambrose Griffiths, who was then made to Bishop of Hexham and Newcastle, whereas Basil was made Archbishop of Westminster and Cardinal. Patrick only died last year in his 90s. He was abbot for the whole time of my formation in the monastery. And this is the lectern, where the monk of the week reads to the other brethren while they are having their meals. And in the little garden, secluded garden outside, which has now been protected, I see, with trellis frames, there is a bust of John Henry Newman, now Blessed John Henry Newman. So the refectory is off to the left there, and the main hall is just ahead. And on the wall here is a portrait of the original house that stood on this side of the valley where that main building now stands. And this was the house that was given to Anselm Bolton to give to the community of St Lawrence at Gilloise when they were expelled from France after the French Revolution. And this is where Ampleforth started conventual life in 1802. There are a number of other pictures along the walls which show some of the houses that the monks stayed in before they finally settled here at Ampleforth, having been expelled 15 years earlier during the French Revolutionary period. We've now come into the main Abbey church proper. There is actually, being Holy Wednesday, there is a lot of preparation going on for the major celebrations and rituals for Holy Thursday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Easter Vigil and Easter Sunday itself. But you can see in front of you that there is a large stone altar with its own baldacchino above it, in the middle of which is the Blessed Sacrament, and normally surrounding it on each side would be 3 large candlesticks with 3 large candles in them, known as the Big Six. I'll come back to that when we go into the monastic choir. You may also notice that the stonework is a different colour from the stonework of the main body of the church surrounding it, but is in fact the same colour as the stonework of the chancel where the monks' choir is behind. And when the Abbey church was completed in the 1950s, the whole arch, which had previously stood further back in the other part of the church, was put onto rollers and gently moved forward into its current permanent position. The altar you can see just in front of the main altar is a new addition that has just been completed and blessed, and is made from wood from the monastery's own land, and in the monastery's own workshops. And you'll notice that we have a number of organs in the church. 2 of them are behind in the transept, 2 in the chancel at the back of the monk's choir, and then silver trumpets high in the dome, which makes up the 5th organ. So this is the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin. The power of God is symbolised by this circle with the rays of energy and light coming out, and in the bottom left-hand side is the Virgin in the womb of St Anne being conceived. And then, after passing the 15th century French statue of the Blessed Virgin, we come to the Annunciation, so the angel Gabriel on the left-hand side and the Blessed Virgin on the right-hand side, with the Holy Spirit as a dove covering her and causing her to conceive Jesus. Then we have the marriage feast of Canaan, where the Virgin tells Jesus that they've run out of wine, and he says, "What is that to me?" But then tells the servants to go outside and on the bottom side fill the pitcher with water on the bottom left, and then on the bottom right he transforms it into wine. Then we move on to the Feast of Pentecost, where the Holy Spirit descends upon the apostles and disciples and the Blessed Virgin, who is on the left, and on the right is St Peter. And we know it's St Peter because down at the bottom of the image, down here, there are the keys of the kingdom. And then finally we have the Dormition of the Blessed Virgin.
or the Assumption. So at the point of death, the Catholic dogma is that Mary was bodily assumed into heaven, having been untouched by the stain of sin. So the white image is of the Virgin dying, and then you see a blue image that she begins to rise up, and then finally on the right hand side at the top is her son looking down on her, now fully revived and full of life. And these are relatively new stained glass that was only installed in the last 15 years in the Lady Chapel here.
In the Holy Cross Chapel, we see on the wall above the altar a 13th, possibly 14th century French carving of crucifixion. And if you look closely at the carving, there is a sense of real suffering and death. And it's worth bearing in mind that at the time that this carving was made, the Black Death had been sweeping across Europe and decimating populations, and so this kind of agony of suffering was probably only too familiar to the poor people of the time. In this chapel again, we have another stained glass window by Patrick Rentians showing the crucifixion scene.
Dean and Chapter of Westminster gave the arms on the right hand side to the community at Ampleforth in recognition of their origins as the community of Westminster before the Reformation. The arms on the left hand side are the arms of the Dean of Westminster, and in the centre is a tile taken from the chapter room at Westminster Abbey, and the carving, the text says Attenditea Petram unde excis estis, which look to the rock from which you were hewn, which is a pun on the idea that Westminster Abbey was St. Peter's Abbey, and Peter is the Latinization of the word rock, Petram, and the coat of arms that is there, the yellow and blue at the bottom is meant to represent the shoreline of the River Thames. On the left-hand side are the crossed keys of St. Peter, because it was dedicated to, Westminster Abbey is dedicated to St. Peter. And on the right-hand side are the cross and martlets of St. Edward the Confessor, who founded Westminster Abbey just before the Battle of Hastings.
We come now to St. Benet's Chapel, and in the wall of this chapel is another 14th century French carving, this time in alabaster, of what is known as the Throne of Grace, which is God the Father holding up the crucifix bearing his Son, with the Holy Spirit hovering as a dove, and the small globe at the foot of the cross representing the salvation of the world. We have a wooden carving behind the altar of St. Benedict with Sts. Maurus and Placid, two of his first disciples in the life of St. Benedict as told by St. Gregory the Great. And then finally, in the main window in this chapel, we have a portrait of St. Benedict as the father of monastic life in the community, and St. Lawrence the Martyr, who is the patron saint of the monastic community at Ampleforth. When I joined the monastery back in 1990 as a junior monk, I sat in this first seat on this side of the choir. As new monks joined, I moved up the seats, which is the normal practice. Facing the altar is the abbot surrounded by the big six. So the abbot would sit in his throne in the centre of the choir, and then her prior and sub-prior, and then 4 senior monks sitting on either side. Because in monastic spirituality and theology, the abbot holds the place of Christ in the monastery, and as Christ in the tabernacle is surrounded by 6 big candles, then Christ in the monastery is surrounded by the 6 big monks. Well, hello again everyone. It is now Maundy Thursday, Holy Thursday, Thursday of Holy Week, however you want to describe it. We'll be popping down into town in Scarborough shortly, just for a final walkabout before we make our way back home to Abingdon. Yesterday we spent the day in Whitby and then went to Ampleforth, which was a very nice experience. I've got lots of videos, so I'll put together some bits and pieces from that. Unfortunately, when I came away, I got my tablets out and put them on the side with all my other things, and then put all the other things in my bag and left my tablets at home. So unfortunately, on Tuesday night I didn't really sleep at all, so I was very tired yesterday, and my stomach was a little bit unsettled, probably because of not having my tablets. Last night I didn't have a full night's sleep, but I slept a lot better, so I'm feeling a lot brighter today than I was yesterday evening, which is why I didn't record yesterday evening to give you an update on what we'd done while we were out in Whitby. On Tuesday night, I checked online and I discovered that there was, in fact, a craft shop in Whitby, which Wendy and Bob hadn't been to when they'd previously been. Last year, I think they came up. So we went. There are lots and lots and lots of hills in Whitby. It's basically it's a fishing harbour, but in the middle of a deep ravine, so both sides of the town go very steeply up from the harbour. So I took them up to Whitby Abbey and the St Mary's Church, parish church of Whitby, because they're quite striking buildings, and I've got some video of St Mary's Church in Whitby, which I hope you'll find quite interesting. We then went back down, and I took them up another steep hill on the other side of town and took them to Whitby Crafts. It's not a very exciting name, but it's a well-established shop. It's been in Whitby for 51 years. I was talking with the proprietor, and they had previously been on the other side of the town where the abbey and the church are, which is much more the tourist side of town. And she was saying that they had a high footfall in the shop on that side of town, but a very low hit rate in terms of actual sales. So when they moved over about 5 years to their current location, which is a little bit more out of the way, but she said that the people who want to get crafts materials go to the shop. So their hit rate is almost 100% now. They have a much lower footfall, which is good, because one of the problems they had on the other side of town was that people who wanted to get material and wool couldn't get into the shop. It was too crowded with tourists who were just having a mooch around and weren't actually looking to buy anything. So she feels that the new location is a much better location. And things are going well, and I have to say, it was a very small shop, probably no bigger than my hotel suite here. I'm calling it a suite, even though it's only one room, really, because I have a seating area down here as well as the bedroom up there and the bathroom to the side, so it's kind of a suite. But she has utilised the space incredibly well. So it's absolutely jam-packed full of stuff, but it's all very clear. You can see what's actually there. So I was talking with her at length while she was measuring out the material that I bought. So I'll talk about what I bought. She had a window display, and in the window I saw a fabric that I just knew I had to buy, and I went in and I found it, and this is it. And it's lots and lots of colourful, characterful cats. I just absolutely love this. I was talking with Wendy yesterday afternoon while we were having tea at Ampleforth, and I think probably what I will be using these items for, I want to start making soft furnishings for my home. Not necessarily simply cushions and the like, but and table runners, but also wall hangings. I think it would be quite nice to have seasonal decorations around the home, and I want to use all the various different crafts that I love taking part in, and just beautify the home. So the other thing that I bought, the other material that I bought, this is called their comic sheep fabric, and here it is, and it's just, I just love this. It's on quite a stiff canvas, and I'm hoping to make some notions pouches and possibly project bags using this fabric. I've got some ideas about what I want to make in terms of notions bags, the pouches, as I say, for various gifts for people. So I love the expressions on this sheep's face. I just think these are really, really happy fabrics. So those are the two fabrics that I bought. And I was chatting with the proprietor, as I say, and was saying that I didn't like to buy anything whilst I was away that I could buy in my local yarn and wool and fabric shop, because, as I've said many, many times, you use it or you lose it, and I wouldn't want to let my local fabric and yarn shop suffer. And also, I think it's the thing about these two fabrics is when I use them, and when I have used the items that I make from them, it's always going to remind me of Whitby. And so it's quite nice to have that souvenir, handcrafted souvenir. But there were also, as you know, I'm a fan of Signet yarns. I've been using Signet yarns as my sock yarn for my Just Follow, the Yellow Brick Road socks that I'm currently working on. That I was working on in the car coming up, and I'll be working on in the car going down again. And I'm really a fan of Signet yarns, but they had in this shop in Whitby a range that Masons don't stock, so I bought these, and it's the Boho Spirit. It's 100% acrylic, and it was advertised as a Aran weight yarn, although it doesn't actually say on the pack. I would say from the feel of it that it's actually a DK. It's for 4 to 4.5 millimeter needles and hooks, which for me is a DK size yarn. And it's their boho range. Unfortunately, the colours. Oh yes. So this is mojo, and I just think the iridescent sheen. It's such a beautiful range of colours. I think this definitely has to be a shawl. And I saw a second one, which I also wanted, which is Moonbeam, which is these lovely greys, but then this lovely pale pink, which transfers into a vivid magenta. So I just love these. It feels, although it's 100% acrylic, it feels like wool, and it has a halo, which I'm amazed by. I really like the look of it. I know a couple of people who would love a shawl made out of this, and being a DK weight yarn, I think it will be quite easy to make a nice autumnal shawl, maybe for the late summer as well. So that's the yarn that I bought. And I also have been on the lookout for the last month or so for a particular crochet hook, which is the 20mm hook. I have a project in mind for this, and I needed the hook, but because I couldn't find the hook, I wasn't buying the yarn that I wanted to use with the hook. I've now got the hook, so when I get back to Masons, I will be able to buy the yarn that I want, and I will be developing a project which I think you'll be quite interested in seeing once it's done. So I'm not going to say what it is at the moment. I just want to get the yarn and get it going, and then I'll talk about it in a future episode. But yes, that's my huge 20mm hook. So I finally found one. So that was what I bought in Whitby Crafts. As I say, I really enjoyed chatting with the proprietor. She was a very nice, chatty person. And then we went on to Ampleforth from Whitby, and I was able to show Bob and Wendy and talk them around. They'd been previously but hadn't gone into many of the places, so I took them on a very detailed tour of the church. And I did quite a bit of filming. I didn't film everything for you because it was one of those situations where I needed to focus on a certain things. But I hope you'll be interested in some of the film that I produced, and I've not decided yet whether I'm going to do a rambling on episode or whether I'm simply going to do a super duper extended podcast this week. I suppose by the time you've seen this, it will either be incorporated into a super duper episode or it will be a separate entity. So I want to do a lot more recorded voiceover, because being a church and being an active church, I didn't want to talk a great deal whilst in there, and wanted to keep the volume down. So I will, when I get home, I'll be checking through what footage I have, and I'll probably write myself a script and talk about the abbey and the church and my life as a monk and all that kind of thing. So look forward to that episode, or that inclusion in this episode. But while we were there, I bought a couple of things. In the Abbey bookshop, well, the Abbey shop it's now called, it used to be the bookshop. It has lots of books, but it's also got other things. I bought the latest version of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I had, when this first came out, in the late 1990s, the abbot bought a copy for every monk. So we all had the original edition. I gave mine away to someone who wanted to know about stuff, so I gave my version to them in the early noughties, in fact. This is the latest updated edition by the Catholic Truth Society, which is a branch of the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales. So it's they're known as CTS. They've been publishing pamphlets about the Catholic faith for 100 and something years, probably not long after the foundation of the English dioceses in the mid 19th century, in fact. And so it's not a light read. It's quite a dense theological text, although it has been prepared in a way that an educated but an educated non-theologian could read and get a lot from. So it's explaining the theology of the Catholic Church without necessarily going into the deeper philosophical underpinnings, which is what a theology degree would normally provide you with. So it's really for anybody who, any intelligent reader would find this quite interesting. If they're interested in the subject matter, of course. If you're not interested in the subject matter, it's not going to be a matter of great interest, I wouldn't imagine. But for those who are interested in the subject matter, it's accessible to the intelligent reader, is how I would describe it. So it's not a dumbed down version, it's a lay version, if you like. And by that I don't mean non-ordained, I mean non-professional version of the Catechism. So that was the book I wanted to buy to replace the edition that I'd given away. But part of the Abbey grounds, is an orchard. And the orchard is the most northerly commercial orchard in Europe. And it preserves quite a lot of the medieval and early modern varieties of apples. So there are something like 70 or 80 species of apple that are grown there. And the monks have expanded. They've employed a couple of professionals. So there's a professional orchard keeper, but also they've employed a professional artisanal brewer and chef who has prepared cookbooks but also has started fermenting different types of apple cider and also then distilling that into apple brandy. So they've got a whole range of liqueurs and spirits and beverages that people can buy. And so for my Easter celebration on Sunday, I bought myself a flagon of the draft cider from the Abbey. It's actually a really quite nice bottle. The one thing that surprises me is how inexpensive it was. I mean, it's more expensive than the mass-produced cider that you can buy in any supermarket, but it's still well within the reasonable price range. So I was really pleased with that, and I was surprised at how inexpensive relatively it was for an artisanal product. It's a really nice flagon as well, so I can see myself using this bottle for other purposes after I've consumed the contents. I won't necessarily consume it all in one sitting, so you don't have to be too worried about that. But the other thing that I bought, we were in the coffee shop and they were actually selling the porcelain that they used for on the tableware, if you like, and I bought myself a nice Ampleforth Abbey teapot. The coat of arms you can see, I will talk about it again in the video from the Abbey Church, but the coat of arms was donated to the monks of Ampleforth by the Dean of Westminster. It is one of the medieval coats of arms of the Abbey. The Dean has his own coat of arms, and so this was not in use any longer by the Abbey, but it was in their possession, as it were. So they donated it to the monks of Ampleforth in recognition that Ampleforth Abbey is itself the descendant of the medieval House of Westminster. And so I'll just briefly describe what you can see, although I can't get it into full focus. The blue and yellow at the bottom of the shield indicates the shoreline of the Thames, so the blue being the river and the gold being the shoreline. The top left quarter is on the red background are the keys of St. Peter. So there's a key made of precious metal and a key made of base metal, which represent the power of St. Peter to bind in heaven and bind on earth. And obviously the precious metal is binding in heaven, and the base metal is binding on earth. And the reason that's included is because the Abbey of Westminster is dedicated to St. Peter the Apostle. And then on the left hand side, the blue quarter, which has what's known as the martlets and cross of St. Edward the Confessor. And the reason for that is that Westminster Abbey, although it was a much more ancient foundation, was refounded in 1060 by St. Edward the Confessor, who is in fact, his shrine is in the Abbey. He was the last, well no, Harold Godwinson was the last Anglo-Saxon king of England. Edward the Confessor died in 1066 and Harold succeeded him and lost the Battle of Hastings to William the Conqueror, who was a Norman. So Edward the Confessor is quite a significant figure. And in fact, University College in Oxford also has this device, the martlets and cross, because the tradition is that University College was also founded by Edward the Confessor, although in fact that's not, in every real sense, the university was only founded in the 12th century, so it's not. University College is based upon a foundation that was founded by Edward the Confessor, but long before the university was founded, because universities didn't exist in the medieval world until the 12th century. Surmounting the arms and dangling by the sides are the tassels, the hat and the tassels. These are the medieval symbols of senior office in the Catholic Church. So an abbot would have a green hat with 6 green tassels. A bishop would have a purple hat with 6 purple tassels. An archbishop would have a purple hat with 10 purple tassels rather, and a cardinal has a red hat with 15 red tassels on each side. And indeed, we still to this day talk about a newly appointed cardinal being given the red hat by the Pope as a symbol of his office. And I say his. Cardinals are not... The rank of cardinal is not an order of priesthood. There is, in fact, in the 19th century, the last of the lay cardinals, the last of the non-ordained cardinals, died in the 19th century. There is absolutely no reason why, for example, a cardinal could not be a woman. And indeed, there has been a lot of talk in the last couple of pontificates. St. John Paul II and Benedict XVI and Francis have all talked about the potential for appointing women as cardinals, because the cardinals are literally there to assist the Pope in running the church in Rome. And because the Roman Church is the major see of the Latin Church, the Catholic Church as it's known, they effectively help the Pope to run the whole of the Latin Church. But they are political jobs, not religious jobs. And there has been a lot of talk, in particular things like the dicastery on the family and the dicastery on religious. Given that most religious in the world are women, it would make some sense for the cardinal in charge of the religious orders to be a woman, for example. Because although as a monk, I'm a male religious, we are a significant minority, but we are very much a minority. It's something like 2/3 to 1/3 of all religious are women. So there are particular jobs like those which probably are better filled by women, but then there are also significant other dicasteries, like on the church in the world, given that most parishes, the active people within the parish, the people who are running most of the active groups in the parishes are women. Again, the church and the dicastery for the church in the world why not have a woman cardinal in charge of this? So this will probably be the first way in which women assume more leadership roles in the Catholic Church. I hope to see this in my lifetime. I can see no reason why it shouldn't happen. But anyway, it was just, whilst talking about cardinals' hats, I thought I'd just mention this potential for development, which doesn't stray into the more thorny issue of whether a woman can be ordained a priest or not. Which is a more difficult theological and sociological question than perhaps a podcast such as this should be going into in a kind of throwaway session. Anyway, so I've been whittering on for about 25 minutes now, so I will stop recording and go and get ready to go out for a walk with Bob and Wendy. We have to vacate the rooms by 9 o'clock, so we'll just take our bags down to the car and then we'll walk down into town. So next time I speak to you, I shall probably be back in Abingdon, but we'll see what happens. So until later, bye for now.